Both pilots jump out of a burning plane. 260 passengers are alone in the sky. Then a boy from the last row stands up. He walks to the empty cockpit. He says 4 words. Call sign Falcon. What happens next saves every single life on board. Before we get into how we got here, comment where you're watching from, and hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. Skyline Airways Flight 812. Manila to Los Angeles. 29,000 feet over open Pacific water, for hours past the coastline, deep into the part of the ocean where no radar sees you clearly and no rescue boat is close. The cabin was dark. Most of the 261 passengers were asleep, blankets pulled up, headphones in, the hum of the engines the only sound. Then the hum changed. A grinding noise from beneath the floor near row 14. A shudder through the fuselage. Then a flash of orange light through the cabin windows on the left side. Engine 2 had failed catastrophically, and it hadn't failed quietly. A turbine blade had sheared apart mid-flight and punched straight through the cowling, and the debris had cut into a fuel line running along the wing route. Within 90 seconds, flame was licking along the underside of the wing, and smoke was already curling backward into the cabin through a breached seal near the aft galley. In the cockpit, Captain Reyes and First Officer Voss were fighting a battle they were losing in real time. Fire suppression systems fired and failed to fully extinguish the blaze. Electrical systems tied to that wing began to fail one after another, first the secondary displays, then half the primary flight computer, then the autopilot itself, kicking the aircraft into full manual control at altitude, in the dark, with one engine burning. Fire's not out, Voss said, voice tight. Suppression bottles are empty. It's spreading toward the fuel tank. Cut fuel to 2, Reyes said, hands moving fast across the overhead panel. Cut. Still burning. It's structural now, not just the engine. The captain keyed the radio. Mayday, 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 Skyline 812, uncontained engine fire, fuel fed, spreading to wing structure, request immediate. The transmission cut. A control cable running near the fire had burned through. The rudder authority dropped. The aircraft yawed hard left, and Reyes had to fight the controls with both hands just to keep the nose from rolling further. If that wing spar goes, we lose the wing, Voss said. Not the aircraft. The wing. They both knew what that meant. Not a slow disaster. A sudden one. Reyes made the call every pilot dreads and no pilot ever wants written into their name. We can't save this from here. If we stay, we go down with it and take everyone with no chance. If someone gets a clean airframe for even a few more minutes, there's a chance for people in the back. There was no ejection seat on an Airbus A320. There was no parachute built into a commercial jet. But there was, on this aircraft, an emergency escape hatch above the cockpit, installed for exactly one purpose, allowing flight crew to bail out during ground fires when the cabin doors were blocked. It had never, in the history of the aircraft type, been used in flight. Using it in flight, at altitude, in the dark, over open ocean, was not a procedure. It was a last resort born entirely out of options running out. Voss, hatch, Reyes said. Sir, that's for ground egress. I know what it's for. I'm telling you what we're doing with it. Reyes keyed the cabin PA with hands that were shaking despite everything. This is your captain. We have an uncontrolled fire in the left wing. I am not able to control this aircraft from the flight deck any longer. God forgive me for what I have to do next. He released the hatch. The pressure differential ripped it away instantly, and the wind at altitude screamed through the flight deck like something alive. Reyes clipped into the emergency parachute pack stowed beside the hatch, standard safety equipment nobody had ever expected to use, and without another word, he was gone, pulled up and out into the black sky. 5 seconds later, Voss followed, canopy snapping open white against the night. The autopilot, damaged but not destroyed, held the aircraft in a shallow descent. Nobody was flying it. Nobody was going to fly it. 261 people were now on an aircraft with a burning wing and an empty cockpit, somewhere over the middle of the Pacific. In seat 41C, the very last row, next to the lavatories, sat a 12-year-old boy named Eli Navarro. It was the cheapest seat on the plane, the one that didn't recline, the one nobody wanted. He was flying alone for the first time, on his way to live with his father in Los Angeles after his parents' divorce, a backpack full of comic books and a battered paperback wedged under the seat in front of him. The book was about a fictional fighter pilot named Falcon, a call sign the character used across a whole series Eli had read a dozen times, a character who flew into places no sane pilot would go because someone needed him to. Eli hadn't been asleep. He never slept on planes. He'd felt the shudder, seen the orange flicker through the window, smelled the smoke drifting back through the cabin. Then he heard the captain's voice over the PA, braking, and he heard the sound of the hatch tearing away above the flight deck, a violent bang the whole front third of the cabin heard and felt. The cabin exploded into chaos. People were screaming, grabbing children, grabbing each other, recording videos with shaking hands, saying goodbye to people who weren't there to hear it. A man 2 rows up was sobbing into his phone, telling a voicemail he'd never intended to leave that he was sorry, that he loved his wife, that he tried. Eli unbuckled his seatbelt. He didn't run. He didn't scream. He stood up, small for his age, dark hair falling into his eyes, wearing a gray hoodie with a faded logo on it, and he started walking forward, up the aisle, past rows of people who were, in that moment, entirely convinced they were about to die. A flight attendant named Renata Cruz was standing frozen near the forward galley, staring at the ruined hatch above the empty flight deck, smoke curling out around the doorframe. Eli tapped her arm. "Ma'am. You need to ask if anyone can fly." She looked down at him, uncomprehending. "Sweetheart, sit down, please, we're going to figure this. You need to ask on the intercom. Right now. Ask if anyone on this plane knows how to fly a jet." Something about the flatness of his voice, not panic, not shock, just certainty, made her stop and actually look at him. She grabbed the handset. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your flight attendant. Both pilots have left the aircraft. We need anyone with flight experience, military, commercial, anyone, to identify yourself immediately." Silence, except for weeping. Nobody answered. Eli looked past her, down the aisle on the right side, to a window seat in row 19. A woman was there, mid-30s, dressed like she'd come straight from a hangar and fallen asleep before the flight suit sleeves tied around her waist, a faded patch on her carry-on bag shaped like a bird in a circle. "Her," Eli said. "Row 19. Window seat. How do you know she can fly anything?" "The patch on her bag. It's a squadron patch. I've seen it in reference books. That's a fighter wing insignia." Renata ran to the seat with Eli right behind her. The woman was awake now, jolted by the noise, disoriented, staring at the burning wing outside her window. "Ma'am," Renata said, "both pilots have evacuated the aircraft. Do you have any flight training?" The woman's eyes moved from the window to Renata to the small boy standing behind her, and something in her face changed, recognition of the situation, and then something older and heavier underneath it. "I flew fighters," she said quietly. 12 years. I haven't touched a stick in 3. This is a commercial jet," Renata said. "Can you fly this?" The woman looked at the smoke pouring from the open hatch. "I don't know. But nobody else is going to." She stood. She was tall, tired-looking, a woman who'd clearly been running from something long before this flight started. She looked at Eli. "What's your name?" "Eli." "How'd you know about my patch, Eli?" "I read about squadron call signs." "What's yours?" She hesitated, like the word cost her something to say out loud. "Falcon." Eli's whole face changed. Falcon. Like the book. What book? There's a fighter pilot named Falcon in my favorite series. He flies into places nobody else will go. He never leaves people behind. The woman, her name was Captain Dana Osei, though nobody in that cabin would call her anything but Falcon again for the rest of the night, let out something between a laugh and a sob. That's not me, kid. Not anymore. I got 2 people killed on a mission I planned wrong. I quit flying because of it. You're still Falcon, Eli said. And right now 260 people need you to be Falcon one more time. Osei looked at the hatch, at the smoke, at the flames visible through the window licking along the wing. She made the decision the way people make decisions when there isn't really a decision to make. I'm going up there. I need someone with me who won't panic and who can read instruments back to me fast. Renata started to object. He's 12. I need someone calm, Osei said. Not someone big. She looked at Eli. Can you do that? Yes, Eli said. I can do that. They moved forward together. Osei grabbed a fire extinguisher from the galley mount. She told Renata to seal off the cabin behind them as best as the broken door would allow, to keep the worst of the smoke from filling the passenger compartment. The flight deck was chaos. Smoke thick near the ceiling, thinner near the floor, wind screaming through the torn open hatch above, papers and charts flapping loose, alarms chiming over each other in a language of red lights Osei hadn't looked at in years but still, somehow, could read. She dropped into the captain's seat. Eli climbed into the first officer's seat beside her, feet not reaching the floor, eyes level with the instrument panel. Altitude's 26,000, dropping slow on the backup autopilot, Osei said, scanning fast. Airspeed stable. We've got maybe 90 minutes of fuel and no idea what shape that wing is really in. Eli, I need you watching this dial right here, she tapped a glowing readout, and telling me the second it moves faster than it is now. Okay. She reached for the radio, hands already reddening from heat radiating off a scorched panel to her right. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Skyline 812. Both flight crew have bailed out due to uncontained wing fire. This is Dana Osei, former Air Force, call sign Falcon, I have the aircraft. Requesting immediate vectors and rescue coordination. Long static. Then a stunned voice. Skyline 812, say again, did you say both pilots left the aircraft? Affirmative. I'm a passenger. Get every ship and helicopter you have moving toward our position now, because I don't know how long this airframe holds. A different, steadier voice cut in, a senior oceanic controller. Falcon, this is Pacific Control. Nearest suitable runway is 1,400 miles. You will not make that with a wing fire. Understood? Understood. I'm planning to ditch. I need the roughest estimate you can give me on sea state at my position and I need surface vessels moving now. Copy, Falcon. We're activating every asset in range. Coast Guard, Navy, commercial shipping in the lane. Bring them home. I intend to, Osei said, and released the transmit key. She looked at Eli. This is going to be violent when we come down. I need you to trust me completely and do exactly what I say, when I say it. I trust you, Eli said. You're Falcon. The fire kept fighting back. Every few minutes a new system failed, first a secondary hydraulic line, feeding the fire more fuel, then half the remaining cockpit displays, until Osei was flying almost entirely on standby instruments and feel, the way she used to fly decades ago before glass cockpits made guessing unnecessary. She kept one hand on the extinguisher and one on the controls, dousing flare-ups as they crept toward the base of her seat, wrapping a scorched cloth around her free hand when the metal got too hot to touch bare skin. Eli called out the altitude every 100 feet without being asked twice. 22,000. 20,000. 18,000, still descending steady. His voice didn't shake, even when a wiring bundle behind them popped and threw sparks across the cabin and Osei had to lunge sideways to smother it. "You're doing great," she told him. "Keep going." At 12,000 feet, two shapes appeared off the left wing, running lights blinking in formation, a pair of Navy fighters that had been scrambled from a carrier group 200 miles south, the closest thing to help that existed in that stretch of ocean. "Skyline 812, this is Firebird Flight, we have you visual, we see the fire," came a new voice over the radio. "Firebird, this is Falcon. I need you to light the water ahead of us. I'm bringing her down in about 8 minutes. A pause. "Falcon, the Falcon. Someone said that call sign on the Red Sea rescue 3 years back." "That was me," Osei said, throat tight. "Long time ago." "Copy, Falcon. Illuminating your ditch corridor now. Every asset in this ocean is moving for you." The fighters dropped ahead and lit flares that turned the black water below into a pale, churning silver. What the light revealed wasn't good: heavy swells, whitecaps, a rougher sea than Osei had hoped for. She adjusted her plan on the fly, flaps partial, gear up, nose slightly high, speed as low as she could hold without stalling into the water. At 5,000 feet the hydraulics took another hit, the aircraft wanting to roll right, and Osei fought it two-handed, no longer able to spare a hand for the extinguisher. The fire would have to burn on its own for the next few minutes. There was nothing left to do about it but land. She keyed the cabin PA one last time, voice raw from smoke. Renata and the other flight attendants moved fast through the cabin, vests going on, brace positions demonstrated, hands shaking but working. At 500 feet, individual whitecaps were visible below. At 200, the wind buffeted the aircraft hard enough that Osei felt the frame shudder through her hands. At 100, she pulled the nose up to flare, bleeding speed, fighting the urge to flare too hard and stall them the last 30 feet into the water. "Eli, close your eyes. Hold on tight. Don't let go of anything." He closed his eyes. The tail touched first, a glancing blow off a wave crest, and then the belly slammed down full force. The impact was worse than anything Osei's memory of ditching theory had prepared her for. Metal groaned. Overhead bins burst open. The aircraft skipped once, slammed down a second time harder, skipped again, and finally settled, nose slightly down, into the churning black water, water already surging in through the ruined cockpit hatch above them. Osei was thrown forward against her harness hard enough to black out for a few seconds. When she came to, freezing water was already at her waist and rising. Eli was slumped in his seat beside her, a gash above his eyebrow bleeding into his hair, unconscious. "Eli." She fought her own harness release, numb fingers barely working. "Eli, wake up." Something metal, torn loose from the panel above, had come down across her legs, pinning her to the seat. Water climbing toward her chest. Renata waded into the flooding flight deck, water to her shoulders already. "Falcon. Get him first," Osei said. "Get Eli, I'm pinned, get him out." "I'm getting both of you." Renata grabbed the twisted metal with her, both women heaving until it gave way enough for Osei to pull her leg free, pain shooting up through what she was fairly sure was a fracture. She scooped Eli up, still unconscious but breathing, and the three of them fought their way out through the flooding doorway as the aircraft settled deeper, stern first, into the water. Outside, in the glare of Navy flares and the beam of approaching rescue helicopters, 261 passengers bobbed in life vests and inflatable rafts, cold, terrified, and alive. Every single one of them. Osei held Eli against her in the raft, checking his pulse with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. Alive. Breathing. Just unconscious. "You did it," she whispered to him, even though he couldn't hear her yet. "You brought Falcon back. You saved all of us." Eli woke 2 days later aboard a Navy medical ship, 12 stitches above his eyebrow, a mild concussion, and a room full of people who wanted to see him the moment he opened his eyes. Osei was 2 beds over, both hands wrapped in bandages from burns, a fractured leg in a brace, and a look on her face that had shifted, somewhere over that ocean, from a woman running from her call sign to a woman who'd finally stopped running. "You're the one who told them my patch meant something," she said, when they were finally both awake enough to talk. "I read a lot of aviation books," Eli said. "I knew Falcon patches. I didn't know you'd actually be Falcon." "I almost wasn't," she admitted. "I hadn't flown anything in 3 years. I told myself I was done." "You're not done," Eli said. "You just needed someone to remind you." She laughed, wet-eyed. "That's a lot of wisdom for 12. "I read a lot," he said again, and she laughed harder, and it didn't hurt as much as she expected it to. In the weeks that followed, the investigation confirmed what everyone suspected: a fatigue crack in a turbine blade, missed in the last inspection cycle by a matter of days, had triggered the failure. Captain Reyes and First Officer Voss were found alive by a container ship 4 hours after they jumped, both treated for exposure and released, both publicly thanked by the airline and privately haunted by a decision that saved the only lives it could have. Eli went on to finish that book series about the fictional Falcon before he turned 13, and told anyone who asked that he was going to be a pilot himself one day, not because he wanted to be famous, but because he now knew, in a way most people never have to learn firsthand, that ordinary people are sometimes the only thing standing between 260 passengers and the bottom of the ocean. The passengers of Flight 812 later founded a scholarship fund in both their names, the Falcon Fund, for kids interested in aviation and for pilots recovering from the kind of mistakes that make people want to quit before they've had the chance to become someone's Falcon. In the first weeks after the ditching, Jose's hospital room filled with visitors nobody expected and some she'd spent years avoiding. Renata came first, carrying a bouquet of flowers she'd bought in the ship's tiny commissary because it was all that was available. "You pulled me out of that flooding cockpit," Jose told her. "I didn't pull you out. We pulled each other out." Renata had 2 sons waiting for her in Manila, and she cried harder talking about them than she had during the ditching itself, because it was only once she was safe that the fear finally caught up to her. A young father named Marcus Villarreal came next, carrying his infant daughter, who had slept through the entire crash swaddled against her mother's chest in row 22. "We named her Dana," he said. "After you. She's got a whole life now because you didn't sit back down when that kid told you to stand up." Jose held the baby for a long time and didn't say anything at all, because there wasn't anything that felt big enough to say. Then, on a gray afternoon 9 days after the ditching, a woman Jose hadn't spoken to in 6 years knocked on the door of her hospital room. Her name was Priya, and she was Jose's younger sister, and the silence between them had started the day Jose missed their mother's final months in hospice because she was flying overseas on a mission she couldn't walk away from. "I saw it on the news," Priya said, standing in the doorway, not quite able to come in. "I saw the footage from the Navy planes. You flying with your hands on fire." She started crying before she even finished the sentence. "I called you selfish for years. I told people you cared more about strangers than about your own family. And then I watched 260 strangers walk off a life raft alive because you didn't quit." "I wasn't choosing them over Mom," Jose said quietly. "I didn't know how to choose anybody back then. I ran from all of it." "I know that now," Priya said. "I'm sorry it took this for me to understand it." They sat together for hours that afternoon, the way sisters do when the anger finally runs out of places to hide. A week into her recovery, a delegation from her old squadron arrived unannounced, 3 officers she hadn't seen since the mission that made her walk away from military flying in the first place. They didn't bring flowers. They brought her old flight jacket, the one she'd left behind in a locker she never went back to clean out, patches still sewn on, including the one with the bird in a circle that had started this whole chain of events from a stranger's carry-on bag. "We heard the call sign on the recordings," the senior officer said. "Command wants to offer you an instructor billet. Training the next generation to do what you did last week." "I already have hands that don't work like they used to," Jose said, looking down at the bandages. "I don't know what kind of instructor that makes me." The kind who actually knows what it costs, the officer said. That's the only kind worth having. She didn't say yes that day. She didn't say no, either. She just held the jacket for a long time, the way people hold things they thought they'd never be allowed to touch again. 3 months after the ditching, the surviving passengers organized their first reunion, calling themselves, without any real vote on the matter, the Falcon family. 261 people who should have died in the middle of the Pacific and instead got to go home to birthdays and anniversaries and ordinary Tuesdays they no longer took for granted. At that first reunion, a woman named Grace Odom stood to speak, the mother of the baby named Dana. 5 months ago we thought we were finished, she said. Both pilots gone, plane on fire, no one at the controls. Then a boy stood up in the last row and a woman 2 rows from the front remembered who she used to be. 260 of us are alive because neither of them sat back down. Eli was there too, 13 now, the stitches long healed into a thin pale line above his eyebrow that he'd later tell people made him look like he'd survived something, which he had. When it was his turn to speak, he kept it short. I just knew the patch, he said. Falcon did the actual flying. Osei, sitting in the front row, shook her head at that, because by then she'd stopped believing there was a version of that night where she stood up on her own. Skyline Airways released its full investigation report 5 months after the ditching. A fatigue crack in the fan blade of Engine 2, present since manufacture, had gone undetected through 2 inspection cycles because of a gap in the inspection procedure that the airline quietly rewrote industry-wide within the year. Reyes and Voss, both cleared of any wrongdoing, gave a joint statement thanking Osei and Eli by name, and Osei made a point of writing back to both of them privately, telling them what she told Eli in the raft, that leaving the aircraft when they did was the only decision that gave anyone downstream a chance at all. The offers came fast after the story went public: television interviews, a book deal, a movie option, a standing offer of free first-class travel for life from Skyline Airways, which Osei declined the way she declined almost everything with her name attached to it. What she accepted instead was a teaching post at a flight academy outside Denver, training the next generation of commercial pilots not in aerobatics or showmanship but in the boring, essential discipline of staying calm when every system in front of you is failing at once. The secret isn't bravery, she told her first class of students. The secret is that you stop thinking about yourself and start thinking about the people counting on you. That's the whole trick. Everything else is just practice. Eli visited her academy the summer he turned 16, already logging hours in a small trainer aircraft with an instructor 20 years younger than Osei but taught, indirectly, out of the same lesson plan. I'm going to fly humanitarian routes when I'm done, he told her. Disaster relief. The kind of flying where nobody's paying you to look good, just to show up. Osei, whose hands had never fully regained their old precision and whose knee still ached before storms, told him that was exactly the kind of flying worth doing, and that she'd expect him to write to her from every runway he ever landed on. 10 years after Flight 812 came down in the Pacific, the Falcon Fund had put more than 400 young pilots and aviation mechanics through training they couldn't otherwise have afforded, and the Falcon family reunion had grown to include children and grandchildren of the original passengers, all of them existing in a future that very nearly didn't happen. Eli, by then a first officer flying relief cargo into disaster zones, still called Osei every year on the anniversary of the ditching, and every year she told him the same thing. You're the one who made me stand up that night, she'd say. Don't ever let anyone tell you the kid in the last row didn't do anything. On the 20th anniversary of the ditching, the Aviation Museum in Denver opened a small permanent exhibit near the entrance, Osei's flight jacket in a glass case, a scale model of an A320 with the cockpit hatch left open, and a short recording of the Mayday call looping quietly for visitors who stopped to listen. Osei attended the opening in a wheelchair by then, her knee having finally given out for good, but her voice was as steady as it had been over the ocean. A young girl, maybe 11, wandered up to her during the reception. Are you really her? The pilot from the story? I really am, Osei said. My teacher read us the story. About the boy who knew your patch. The girl looked at the exhibit, then back at Osei. I want to be like him. Or like you. I don't know which. Osei smiled and took the girl's hand. It doesn't matter which one you end up being, she said. What matters is that when it's your turn, you stand up instead of staying in your seat. That's the whole story. Everything else is just details. The girl nodded like she understood, though she was too young yet to really know what she'd just been told. Somewhere across the room, Eli, 42 now, gray already starting at his temples, still flying relief cargo into places that needed him, watched the exchange and thought about a night 20 years earlier when he was small enough that his feet didn't reach the cockpit floor, and a woman he'd never met told him to keep his eyes on a single glowing number and trust that it would matter. It had mattered. It always had. Because sometimes the bravest person on the plane isn't the one flying it. Sometimes it's the kid in the last row who simply refuses to sit down.